Morning, ladies and gentlemen. How are we feeling? Did you see those faces? The light in their eyes, the hope, the expectation. The future is me. Can we give that a round of applause, please? As we begin our session this morning on building human capital in Africa, we're talking about the future of a generation. My name is Julie Gishuru. I'm the host of the Africa Leadership Dialogues, and I believe in Africa. I recognize our challenges, but I believe the future is our young people and that they can transform the continent. Now, Africa is the world's most youthful continent. And I'm excited this morning that we're going to hear from the young voices of Africa. It doesn't happen very often at the bank, so can we give that a round of applause, please? We have a lot of young Africans who will be sharing their thoughts and their perspectives, and we will also hear from policymakers as we craft the way forward for our continent. I believe you will be floored by success stories, things that we have done that work, things that we can do more, and you will be touched by some of the stories that we do need to change, because some things must change. Now, ladies and gentlemen, 6 months after the World Bank released its new Human Capital Index, today marks the launch of the World Bank's Human Capital Plan for Africa. I think on your seats you will find a summary of the plan. Could you just wave it if you have it? Or you've seen it so we know, yes, it's got around. Excellent, thank you. And go through it, read it, internalize it, and as you leave, please do also take copies of the Plan for Africa and the Human Global Capital Project booklet. Now, having said that, I want to just recognize that there are many others joining us from outside this room. Thank you very much for being with us. Can we all ensure that we are in one conversation online? The hashtags for that, invest in people, and hashtag Africa Can. And a warm welcome to all those joining us on the World Bank Live site. Now, to those of you here in person, you may have noticed the cutouts. 2 of them here on the stage with me and 2 others outside. I want to tell you a little bit about these. They are part of photos from the campaign of Vincent Tremo. It's called One Day I Will. And this campaign documents the aspirations and dreams of young people in Africa and around the world. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a full exhibit taking place around this room. And I would encourage you after this session to just walk around this room. I want to touch on a couple of the pictures that I saw because as an African and as a mother, they brought me to tears. Pictures of a young African girl who does not have hands, who aspires to be a lawyer, and therefore represent the interests of those who are underrepresented. A young man who says he will become a soldier because he hates war, but he recognizes he needs to protect his people. Do we see the irony in that? The young man who says he wants to protect his forests, how amazing is that? And aspires to do that. These are the voices of the people that we represent this morning. These are the stories that we are telling, and this is why we are all here today in this room. A final message, a housekeeping message. We are going to be speaking in English and in French as well, so I want to encourage you to have a gadget close to you ready if you need translation. Channel 1, English, Channel 2 is French. We also have American Sign Language, which has been provided. We're leaving no one behind, and the gentleman is seated right at the end of the stage if you need to refer to him. Can we give that a round of applause, please, as well? And now to set the stage for us for this exciting morning, let's give a very warm welcome to Hafez Ghanem, the bank's Vice President for Africa, as he comes up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. You were promised that a lot of young people will speak to you, and then you get me. But I have to tell you that Africa is actually rich with its youth. 43% of Africans are younger than 15 years old. This is the continent's future. The continent relies on those girls and boys. Their brain power, their creativity, their energy, their hard work will make Africa prosper and compete in the global economy. I too am very, very confident and very optimistic about the future of Africa. The World Bank's Human Capital Index shows that Africa's children are still a distance away from enjoying full health and complete education. The index reveals that Africa is only at 40% of its economic potential. The disadvantages that many in Africa face are fundamentally unjust. But what is just as important is that economies whose future workers are held back will end up shortchanged. What would you like the future of Africa to look like? Let us imagine an Africa where all girls and boys arrive at school well-nourished and ready to learn, where all girls and boys acquire real learning in the classroom. All girls and boys enter the job market as healthy, skilled, and productive adults. Let us imagine a continent where every child counts, not just by being able to read and master basic math, but by contributing fully towards her family's well-being and her country's economy and GDP. I am honored and pleased to be launching the World Bank's Africa Human Capital Plan today. That's the plan that you were all showing. This will help make the future of every child, that every child counts, a reality. I would like especially to thank Annette Dixon, our Human Development Vice President, for her strong support. Without her hard work and energy, we would not be where we are today. Between today and 2023, we are aiming to reduce drastically child mortality in Africa, saving 4 million lives, avert stunting of 11 million children, increase learning outcomes of girls and boys in school by at least 20%, increase Africa's Human Capital Index by 13%. We need to move quickly and work hard to catch up. Making every child count starts by counting every child. The births of too many African children have never been recorded. Children invisible to the law end up in a blind spot for policy and service delivery. Identity for Development, the ID4D project, is one of many game-changing technological innovations that our African Human Capital Plan will support, also as part of our digital moonshot for Africa. We also want to make children count everywhere, including in the hardest places. Fragility, conflict, and violence deplete human capital directly and indirectly. In the Sahel, school closures have doubled in the last 2 years due to growing insecurity. We will respond to these challenges by ramping up our human capital investments in fragile countries and regions. We will do that. We will ramp them up by 30% between now and 2023. Another game changer for human capital is making every girl and woman count. The World Bank will launch a new series of projects to support the empowerment of women in Africa. This will be grounded in the approach that we call the 4 E's, empowering women and girls, enhancing access to reproductive health and services, education to keep girls in school, and employment and economic opportunities for girls and women. The 4 E's will give families a genuine choice of how many children to have and when to have them. The adolescent fertility rate in sub-Saharan Africa of 102 births per 1,000 girls is 3 times as high as in South Asia. The 4 E's can also dissuade young girls while still children from becoming parents. If we have girls getting married at the age of 12, having children at the age of 13 and 14, we would not be able to reduce maternal mortality, child mortality, or stunting rates. We need our girls to stay in school and to only have children when they are grown-ups themselves and when they are ready. The World Bank is stepping up our investment in human capital by 50% in our next funding cycle. That means over $15 billion of new bank grants and concessional finance dedicated to human capital projects in Africa in between 2021 and 2023. Funds for education, health, and social protection will target policy reforms to unblock structural constraints to human capital developments, such as inefficient domestic spending or a lack of qualified teachers. African countries are clearly committed to lifting their game to further human capital. The fact that we have so many ministers and policymakers today is proof of the commitment that we all have and all our leaders have to this human capital project. 23 countries from our region, covering over 60% of Africa's population, have already become human capital countries. The last addition this week is Chad. So, His Majesty King Letsi and our high-level panel speakers from Rwanda, Malawi, Niger, and Kenya will be able to share their country's drive on the human capital agenda. Things are already changing on the ground. Angola, for instance, is working on a human capital strategy that will empower adolescent girls, tackle stunting, and address the learning crisis. With World Bank support, Madagascar recently started to scale up a social safety net program linked to school attendance and nutrition for 750,000 persons. The Democratic Republic of Congo is about to start implementing a nutrition and health project that targets 2.5 million children under 2 and 1.5 million pregnant and lactating women, supported with a $500 million financing from the World Bank. This is a long-term effort that will require continued advocacy and advancing knowledge. The World Bank will continue to mobilize and convene country leadership, partners, and stakeholders, including via a recently launched civil society dialogue series and a network of Africa Human Capital Champions. We at the World Bank are committed to fully support with all of our energy this program, and I count on all of us to make every child and every person in Africa count. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Hafez. Something struck me when you were speaking. You said, making every child count by counting every child, including in the toughest of places, and that's so important. In the green room, I heard Ruth Kagia, one of our panelists, challenging the team to make sure that access to reproductive health services is there, and you mentioned that. Can we give that a round of applause? And Hafez, you also highlighted teaching and the importance of that education. Ladies and gentlemen, the Global Teacher Prize winner this year is an African teacher from one of the most challenged areas, working in STEM with boys and girls. Can we give that a round of applause? #AfricaCan. Now, I want to welcome a very special guest and our keynote speaker for today to the stage, His Majesty King Letsie III of Lesotho. Before he comes up, and you'll give him a round of applause in a minute, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a human capital champion for Southern Africa. He's a nutrition champion for the African Union, and a food and agriculture organization special ambassador for nutrition. Lesotho is also one of more than 60 countries engaging on the Human Capital Project. Now, ladies and gentlemen, can we put our hands together for His Majesty as he comes up? Thank you. And in Africa style, we ululate.
Honourable Ministers, Ministers of Finance and Development Planning, and all the ministers here present, the Vice President of the Africa region, Vice President of Human Development, and all the senior officials of the bank and other senior officials of governments, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be back in Washington at the World Bank headquarters for this auspicious occasion that is convened as part of the Human Capital Project to launch the Africa Human Capital Plan under the theme Building Human Capital in Africa, the Future of a Generation. I am most grateful to the World Bank Group and its leadership for having the vision and foresight to organize this event where, as leaders and policymakers of the African continent, along with some of our young people, we can discuss this important subject of human capital. The depth of my gratitude and appreciation stems from a strong belief that the building of our human capital deserves to be placed at the center of countries' development strategies, owing to its undoubted catalytic effect on our social and economic development programs and ambitions. It is not an accident that in the conversations we are having about human capital, the World Bank has included our young people. This is because with the fastest growing young population, Africa stands at the crossroads of a huge opportunity. Children under the age of 15 years are estimated to account for more than 40% of the African population. About 11 million young people are expected to enter Africa's labor market every year for the next decade. These statistics compel us to take urgent steps that will allow us to channel this important resource, our youth, towards a path where they can meaningfully contribute to Africa's economic, social, and political development now and in the future. The opportunities created by this population boom, often referred to as the demographic dividend, can only be realized if African leaders and governments can realign their policies and spending priorities towards making timely and smarter investments in our young people, and indeed in people in general. Excellencies, having assumed the responsibility of the African Union Champion for Nutrition and that of the Food and Agriculture Organization Special Ambassador on Nutrition, I have come to appreciate the positive correlation between nutrition and economic development. I now know, as you all do, that well-nourished children grow up healthy and perform well at school. They have a good chance of leading long and healthy lives that will enable them to contribute positively to the economic development of their countries as healthy, educated, and resilient citizens and adults. We are also told that with a population of this robust and well-developed nature, the GDP per worker in our region could be 2.5 times higher than it is today. I have, therefore, made it my mission to raise awareness among leaders worldwide, and particularly on the continent, about the deleterious effect of this development challenge, the challenge of malnutrition and stunting. I have to keep repeating at every opportunity and keep reminding our leaders that sub-Saharan Africa continues to report the world's highest rates of stunting among children. This means that children fall sick more often, miss opportunities to learn, perform less well at school, and grow up more likely to suffer from chronic diseases and are economically disadvantaged in adulthood. I have to remind our leaders that stunted children earn as much as 22% less annual income as adults compared to their peers. And children who are not stunted are also 33% more likely to escape poverty than their stunted peers. This situation, regrettably, means that with 1/3 of our children stunted, sub-Saharan Africa risks condemning millions of children to an adulthood where they remain unskilled, less economically productive, and left behind in the new global economy, which will demand our full participation in the fourth industrial revolution. Having joined this illustrious group of world leaders as a champion of human capital under the World Bank Human Capital Project, I also feel duty-bound to plead with our ministers of finance and ministers responsible for economic planning to lend their weight to our cause by making the necessary and required investments to build our human capital. We have no choice but to initiate and execute policies and strategies that will enable our children to grow into healthy, well-educated, resilient, and productive citizens. After all, we know that the investments we make to tackle malnutrition and stunting attract significant returns. Simply put, in monetary terms, for every dollar invested in nutrition, there is a future economic return of $30. And the truth is, we can no longer afford, as the African continent, to lose 11% of our GDP annually because of malnutrition and stunting. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to state that my country, the Kingdom of Lesotho, was one of the first of a growing coalition of African countries who have made a commitment to invest in their people. We are committed to investing in our human capital because it is good for our people. And it is also the best investment we can make to accelerate long-term, sustainable economic growth. In the financial year 2015-2016, Lesotho public spending on education as a share of GDP stood at 10%. This expenditure has gone to support important national programs like the free and compulsory primary education policy, construction of new classrooms and schools, the school feeding program, and the provision of scholarships for tertiary students at both undergraduate and graduate levels. To complement our own efforts to improve education, in the year 2016, the World Bank supported the government to launch the Lesotho Education Quality for Equality project. And a year later, the Lesotho Basic Education Improvement Project. These projects aim to improve teaching in mathematics and science, and also improve the national curriculum. It also aims to strengthen how schools account for student retention and improve their learning environment by introducing grants for schools to implement improvement plans. I believe it is through projects of this nature that we can give Basotho youth a strong foundation for developing their skills and improving their ability to participate more productively in the economy. Let me take this opportunity to thank the World Bank for stepping up its support through the above-mentioned projects and other initiatives for Lesotho to invest in her future generations and to build our human capital that can provide a strong foundation for sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the ambitious New Africa Human Capital Plan that is being launched today should give us a reason to be hopeful that we are on the right path to effect a lasting change in our struggle to build human capital. Human capital that can drive our nation's economic growth. But for this plan to succeed in its aims and objectives, strong and unwavering political commitment will be required from the African leaders at the highest level. Our people are waiting for and are expecting this political commitment from us. Let us not disappoint them. May I be permitted to conclude my remarks by reminding you all that, like many other challenges of development, the human capital challenge cannot be solved through a single one-shot intervention. It requires sustained, large-scale interventions across many areas: nutrition, water and sanitation, health, education, and also family planning. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to urge all stakeholders gathered here today to join hands in order to tackle the daunting challenges that may lay ahead. Improving and building our human capital will require that we adopt collaborative and coordinated approaches that encompass governments, civil society, development partners, and the private sector, so that we can all together construct strong and robust policies and programs that can stand the test of time. Let us all step up to the mark, seize the moment, and make all of this happen for the benefit of our people and our children. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you for that, Your Majesty. We need strong political will and commitment. We can work on this together. Let's make it happen for our people. Africa stands at the crossroads of a huge opportunity, and we must channel our youth towards a path where they can meaningfully contribute to Africa's development. Thank you so much. I promised you we would hear the voices of young people, and that time has now come. Let me tell you a very quick short story. About 5 years ago, country director for the World Bank in Kenya, Diare Tugai, asked me to come to her office for a meeting. I had never met her, but I made time and I went and sat down, and over an excellent cup of Kenyan coffee, and you must experience Kenyan coffee if you haven't. Over a cup of Kenyan coffee, she said she was dismayed that young people were having a lot of conversations online, on social media, but none of those conversations were related to the key development issues that affected their lives. And she said, how, Julie, do we get them to focus on development? And I said, you know what? Let's start a blogging competition. And that morning, Blog for Dev was born. I'm sure even the Blog for Dev winners here did not know that is where it all began. And today, I'm very excited to call upon Blog for Dev to come up here. We have representatives. It started in Kenya, spread across East Africa. Now I believe we have Sierra Leone, Madagascar, Togo, Zambia represented here, Zimbabwe represented here, Uganda represented here. We give them a warm round of applause as they come up to share their voices with us. And I will ask all the Blog for Dev team to come up, but they will be represented, the speaker will be 22-year-old Sandrine Bwiza, who is joining us from Kigali, Rwanda. She is the co-founder of Imagine We, a publishing house that specializes in children's books set in Rwandan context. I hand over now to Sandrine as she comes up to share the youth perspective. Thank you.
Good morning, leaders, changemakers, citizens, and friends. I am so proud and excited to be standing here in Washington, representing 43 countries across Africa. Let me start by telling you a little bit about my personal story. My name is Sandrine Bwiza. I am from Kigali in Rwanda, very beautiful country. I used a laptop for the first time when I was 15 years old. Up until then, my education were not very creative or innovative. Education to me involved climbing and recycling the same facts without even trying to understand them first. Creativity and critical thinking were not part of my education until I opened up a computer. A computer and internet, in turn, opened up my world. The workplace is changing at incredible speed. Technology is a force all my brothers and sisters should learn to harness. As we prepare for the future, we are intelligent, excited, and ambitious. But we have one problem. We are not equipped. Can you help us? Our plea to you is to teach every young person to speak to a computer. Let us experience the benefits of education and the world at vast seas of where information at our fingertips. Our plea to you is to make sure our teachers are qualified and happy to be coming into work every day. Teachers are important to ensuring computer literacy or any literacy in general. Our plea to you is to make sure we learn not just by reading, by doing too. Nurture Africa's budding startup culture, encourages to innovate and take risks. 11 million young people will enter Africa's labor market every year for the next 10 years. Our plea to you is to empower us and our potential. Mine is just one voice. Just imagine the possibilities, the solutions, if we could all be empowered to face the future with real hope. Can we count on you? I am here to tell you, we are all here to tell you, the future is us.
Yes, yes, the future is us.
Thank you. Let's go.
Wow. Thank you. The future is them, and we have work to do. Have we heard their words? Yes. Have we? Yes. Are we ready to give them what they've asked for? Yes. We must. We really don't have a choice. Thank you so much for your powerful message, Blog for Dev. And you can find all their blogs. They've blogged about development. They've talked about these issues. You can find all their blogs online at blogs.worldbank.org. So please do go online, read, learn more, and let's continue this journey together. Now, our next speaker is truly a gifted speaker. She works magic with her words, and she works on our hearts. She was born in Darfur, Sudan, and moved to the US through Yemen as a 4-year-old. She's been named one of BBC's 100 most inspirational women. Can we give that a round of applause? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador and World Champion Poet, Emi Mahmoud.
My father's voice yanked me awake. My brother had been shot, waiting for that first breath on the other side of the line at a hospital half a world away. I'd never felt fear like that. The thing we'd been fighting for the past 11 years reached the capital and burrowed itself into my next of kin. I'm 21 years old. Well, I'm 25 now. I'm 21 years old, and I know more about death than about living. My life experiences revolve around massacres and funerals. I know how to start revolutions, but I don't know how to lose myself. I don't know how to give in to this thing called youth because I know how it ends. I call my brother an idiot, and he says, live free or die. He says, freedom is a question of life. If you do not reach for it, then you're not alive. This distinct flavor of anarchy stinks of murder, stains like the blood of a good patriot, and leaves a bitter thirst in your mouth only quenched by liberation. That night, burning cities made me feel numb. Bullets made me think of my brother, so I closed my eyes, and I dreamt of lead, of gutted window panes, of Damascus, of Darfur, of Gaza, of Baltimore, and when I awoke, Breathing made me feel guilty, makes me feel guilty, like I should have been there, like I should have fought, like I should have stood and faced the firing squad. When you fight for freedom, you stomach pain like that. This body should be lined with bullets, one for each of my brothers and sisters who stopped a bullet for me. It is the mark of our generation. We are more accustomed to the weight of Molotov cocktails on our bodies than we are to the embrace of one another. I don't want to live like that. Live free or die, die free or live. I want to wake up in a time where civil disobedience doesn't end in death, where children are born under the full moon of revolution, where I haven't lost more people than there are years in my life. This changes you. Not in some earth-moving, groundbreaking kind of way, but bit by bit, and with incredible stillness. It's the little things, like how I cringe at the word protest, like how I don't trust anyone who isn't fighting, like how I am as accustomed to sleeping bodies as I am to dead ones, because it's all the same. My brother hears me frowning through the phone. He says, smile, you'll live longer. Thank you. I'm just going to jump on the stage. When I wrote that poem, I was a sophomore at Yale, and it was 2013. And my brother had been shot in the protests that began in Sudan in 2013. He survived. But this year, when the protests began in December, my cousin was shot and killed in January. He was 15 years old, and he was just about to start college. So in the work that I do, I have the privilege of actually getting to work in advocacy spaces and activism spaces. I was in the ground in Sudan after creating the first fully open and inclusive civilian peace talks in the region. When you're working in spaces that are prone to conflict, and you have all of the people that you really look up to in the development community or in the advocacy community not willing to engage with risk, how is it that you can make the decision to engage with risk? Well, for me, it was very easy because I realized that there were so many young people on the ground engaging with risk every single day. A lot of people talk about the brain drain and about people leaving our countries in Africa and about the, resources leaving as well. But the reality of what I saw is that people are still there. So when I went back and was able to actually motivate people to create a collective responsibility for peace, it changed me because I realized all anyone needs is just somebody to say, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here. What is it that you need? We ended up walking 1,000 kilometers in 30 days last year, not in these shoes. And it broke my heart when my cousin, we say brother in Sudan, was killed this year. But it made me realize that the urgency is very real and that the people who pay the toll the most are young people. So what I got in my life is that a lot of people are able to pass the torch. And that's how I was able to go from, a little immigrant girl not knowing English to somebody who was the closing speaker at my Yale graduation. And I think when I think about the future and becoming an adult that grows up in these struggles and then we grow up to try and see them to completion, I think about all of you and what you're able to do. Don't close the door behind you. Learn to pass the torch. And that's the poem that I'm going to leave you with. This poem is called Mama, and it's about my mom, who passes the torch better than anyone that I know. And yeah, that's about it. The last thing that I'll say is bring someone with you. Bring them into the room with you. Everyone that you're sitting next to, if you look to your left or to your right, there are spaces that you can enter that that person sitting next to you cannot enter. When you enter those spaces, bring them in with you. When you're entering those spaces where the adults talk in the room, bring the youth in with you. I've had the privilege of access in my life. I've gotten to sit with the people who make the decisions and also work with the people who are affected by them. But I haven't been able to grow that yet. So I hope you can help us grow that. Okay. This poem is called Mama. So I'm walking down the street when a man stops me and says, "Hey, yo, sister, are you from the motherland?" Because my skin is a shade too dark not to have come from foreign soil. Because this garment on my head screams Africa. Because my body is a beacon calling everyone to come flock to the motherland. I'm like, yeah, I'm from Sudan. Why? He said, yes, you is, because you got a little bit of flavor in you. Don't get me wrong. I'm just admiring what your mama gave you. What? He really said that. Let me tell you something about my mama. She can reduce a man to tattered flesh without so much as blinking. Her words fester beneath your skin, and the whole time, you won't be able to stop cradling her eyes, because my mama is a woman, flawless and formidable in the same step. Woman walks into a war zone and has warriors cowering at her feet. My mama holds all of us, in her face, in her body, in her blood, and blood is no good once you let it loose, so she always holds us close, keeping us safe from caving in. When I was 7, my mama cradled bullets in the billows of her robes. That same night, she came home and taught me how to get gunpowder out of cotton with a bar of soap. And years later, when the soldiers held her at gunpoint and asked her who she was, she said, I am a daughter of Adam. I am a woman. Who the hell are you? And the last time we went home, we watched our village burn. Soldiers pouring blood from civilian skulls as if they too could turn water into wine. The woman who raised me turned and said, don't be scared. I'm your mother. I'm here. I won't let them through. My mama gave me conviction. Women like her inherit bruised wrists, tired eyes, and a titanium-plated spine. The daughters of widows wearing the wings of amputees. They carry countries between their shoulder blades. Now, I'm not saying that dating is a first world problem, but these trifling mofos seem to be the kind, sorry, I censored it, okay? The kind who'll quote Rumi, but not know what he sacrificed for war. Who'll fawn over Lupita, but turn their racial filters on, who take their politics with a latte when I take mine with tear gas. Every guy I meet wants me my introduction to the dark side, wants me to open up the obsidian skin, let him read every tearful page, because what survivor hasn't had her struggle made spectacle? Don't talk about the motherland unless you know that being from Africa means waking up an afterthought in this country. Don't talk about my flavor unless you know that my flavor is insurrection, it is rebellion, it is resistance. My flavor is burden, it is grit, and it is compromise. And you don't know compromise until you've rebuilt your home for the 3rd time, without bricks, without mortar, without any other option. I turned to the man and said, my mother and I don't walk the streets alone back home anymore. Back home, there are no streets to walk anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Do we feel the shivers? You know, I think this takes us into our panel session perfectly, because I visualized her mom. Did you see her mama? And you know, I thought of this woman who is having to be a protector and a provider in the most difficult of circumstances, and she has no choice. And I thought, if she can get her children through that, then what excuse do we have, ladies and gentlemen, not to get it right? And so that's how we go into this session. Let me introduce our incredible panel. Right next to me, I have Minister Paula Ingabire from Rwanda, and she is the Minister for ICT and Innovation. She's a technology enthusiast as well, and former head of the Kigali Innovation City Initiative. She's also part of Rwanda's Girls in ICT program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Right next to her, we have Ruth Kagia, Senior Advisor and Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of Policy and Strategy to the President of the Republic of Kenya. Before this, she worked here at the World Bank for over 20 years in various different positions, including Country Director for Southern Africa and Senior Director for Education. Ruth Kagia. Right next to her, we have with us Minister Aïchatou Kane, Nigeria's Minister of Planning and a champion for women's rights and economic empowerment as well. Minister Kane. And last but certainly not least, we are happy to have with us Dr. Dalitso Kabambe. He is the governor of Malawi's Reserve Bank. He was also previously the chief economist and deputy director of economic planning for the finance minister. Thank you, ministry. We often complain of all male panels. I'm really encouraged to see we're starting to head in the opposite direction, but we're glad to have male representation here. Going into the discussion, we've heard the words of suffering and of strife. And I want us to remember that, just over 2 decades ago, Rwanda had come out of one of the most vicious conflicts that the world possibly has ever seen. And this country has been able to recover, to rebuild, and not even a generation later is a completely transformed nation. So Paula, maybe you can start with really setting for us the insights that Rwanda has on how conflict, violence, and fragility can be transformed into productivity, stability. How do we do this as we look at human capital and changing the situation for the continent, please?
Thank you, Julie, for having me here today. Maybe to give a little bit of context, I will start off by just giving a bit of background. The impact of fragility, conflict, and violence on human capital is in fact central to Rwanda's progress and story of reconciliation and reconstruction. In fact, this week we commemorated 25 years since the genocide against the Tutsi took place and over 1 million people were killed within 100 days. But before that, our country experienced decades of bad governance, discrimination, violence, and throughout this we lost a lot of human capital and the ability, even the opportunity to accumulate human capital, where we had one segment of the society systematically excluded from education and the opportunities to go to school. And over a period of 40 years, only 1,000 students graduated from university. Wow. We've spent the last 2.5 decades trying to restore order and security at every level of the society, but also setting ambitious goals of how do we create a literate community that is able to groom Rwanda into a competitive country. 25 years ago, we did not only lose some of the brilliant minds through death, but we were also through displacement and forced migration, where even if someone hasn't died, but because of the circumstances, they have to move away. Mm-hmm. So the entire social fabric of the Rwandan community was destroyed, including the infrastructure for education and healthcare, and we're really starting from a very low base. Mm-hmm. Something that was mentioned earlier was, with some of the previous speakers today, was around the concept of brain drain, right, which is a very significant factor in fragility, conflict, and violence cycles. And the African Union estimates around 7,000 Africans that migrate from Africa every year. And so these are some of the results and impacts of fragility, conflict, and violence across the continent. Secondly, there's another aspect to the kind of fragility and the impact, which is around unemployment and inequality, where we have to be very deliberate to empower women and girls, but also people with disabilities, because these tend to be a good proportion of a society that has gone through conflict and violence over the years. Right. And to respond to the second part of your question, which was around what did it take with years of conflict and violence as a country to get ourselves out of that, I think 2 aspects come to my mind. The first is because we had been going through a long history of bad governance, it meant that there had to be good governance and a good leadership to really restore the type of sanity and security within the country. The second element is around inclusion, where everything that we did as a country boiled down to the people. understanding that that was our greatest resource as a country that we were left with, also because naturally we didn't have the natural resources that any other countries have the pleasure of having. And so knowing that our people are our biggest human resource, it meant that we needed to focus on how we make our approach very inclusive and putting them at the heart and center of the programs that the government designs.
Thank you, thank you. And that is what it takes us right back to the importance of investing in people. Dr. Dalito, I'll come to you now. And some of us had the pleasure of listening to you speak as an advocate for women's empowerment. At the International Conference for Family Planning, you made quite an impression actually on some people here and on the World Bank's Human Development Vice President, Annette Dixon. Maybe tell us why, from your vantage point as the Central Bank Governor of Malawi, why is women's empowerment an important issue when it comes to unleashing human capital?
Thank you so much, Jolie. As already highlighted, Africa has about 1.2 billion people. 600 million plus are women. And that's a huge workforce. If it's trained in various skills, expertise, would have engineers, we would have people that are going to help us in the mining, exploitation of the mining industry, that are going to help us in various skills development of the continent and so forth. So women empowerment is very, very crucial. But also let me point out this aspect that we are coming from a history in the continent where women were somehow neglected in terms of education. If you have two children, a boy and a girl, you would focus on a boy as opposed to a girl. And what we have, like an example of Malawi, is that the 70% of women older than 15 years do not have any skills or any qualification out of education. And that's a serious challenge that cuts across the continent, that women were left behind in terms of education and skills development. So we need to focus on educating the girl child now. The statistics are clear that over half of Africa's population are now young people. And all those half are girls. If we focus on educating the girl child and ensure that they get the necessary expertise in various disciplines and areas, then that's where Africa's development is going to come from. And I would say that women or the female gender in the African continent holds the key to our development. In fact, it's also been shown that girls that drop out of school out of early marriages, but also are bearing children at early age, they end up having more children, and those children they are unable to support. There's a problem of malnutrition, stunted,ness, and their children are less better off in terms of their IQ. So we have many young people that are growing that are having less IQ because they came from mothers that did not fully support them. If we educate a girl child, if we focus on investing on women, then we'll sort a lot more problems in the continent. Therefore, we'll have a workforce that is going to be more competitive, that is going to generate us a lot of GDP in the continent. In the case of Malawi, finally, I would give an example. If we were to focus on girl child education, Malawi will be earning somewhere around $600 million more every year for the next 30 years, much more than what we're getting in overseas donor assistance every year. And that's a story that would cut across the whole continent.
Wow, powerful, and thank you so much for that. I think, yes, we can give him a round of applause. Being able to remove women from these cycles of poverty where the next generation just gets locked in. Thank you for talking us through that. Minister Kane, I come to you now, and you also have long championed women's rights and women's economic empowerment in Niger. I think the challenges that women face are very common right across Africa. So do you believe, and how do you believe, perhaps, international cooperation and international partners can further help the empowerment and development of women? Very specifically, please, what must we be doing as we move forward?
Merci de m'avoir invité à ce panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I appreciate it. I should start by telling you that international cooperation plays an important role, a very important role, for our countries in implementing the strategies of development. And this is all the more so if such development strategies focus on human capital. We in Niger have included human capital within, as a major component within our strategy of development, because human capital became very clearly a challenge very early on in terms of demographics, in terms of education, in terms of health care, and in terms of women. A challenge at every single level. The 4 E's that you referred to earlier, that the Vice President referred to earlier, those are all included in this empowerment of women. So the development strategy has got to be implemented with the help of partners. And with the help of partners, it has given us results. Results which, I might add, can be accomplished only, as the King told us, if there is a social mobilization around the issue. It's not enough for the government to come up with laws or to come up with decrees to say, this is what you've got to do. No, you've got to have a social mobilization behind it. And we in Niger have actually created such conditions for social mobilization, whether it is the Zulimas, whether it is the husbands, because let's face it, you've got to involve the husbands as well, or whether it's young people, and I'm so happy to see so many of them here. This was taken on, if you will, then by the whole of the population, and that is why we have had specific, concrete results. That is, education of young girls. This has become a priority. Not just education for the sake of education, but we want to be sure that we have retention so that they don't have early pregnancies and early births or early marriages. We have done whatever we can to, if you will forgive me the term, to recover young girls from where they have been. We have had an education for husbands. Here I would refer back to the King to explain how important this issue is. Because when you go with the traditional clans and the traditional chieftains, then you respect tradition, but at the same time, you put aside any traditional discrimination against women. So we are one of those countries in Africa who is firmly on the side of development. We have the cooperation of the international community, and the World Bank in particular helps us in the G5 countries of the Sahel in a program that allows us to empower women. And that is a program that is being strengthened recently. And that is one of the reasons why we must be sure that we don't give in to momentary economic situations. This is really something that is urgent. I can't tell you how urgent it is that we take this on. And I really thank and congratulate the World Bank for having taken this on as a task. And I think we have got to create the conditions as soon as possible to implement this program of the World Bank.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us that the social mobilization is absolutely critical, and the role of men. In Africa, we remain a patriarchal society, and so we need our men holding our hands as we walk on this journey together, absolutely. Let me come now to you, Ruth Kagia. And, you know, Kenya scored higher than the average for the region on the Human Capital Index. There have been some incredible gains, particularly when it comes, I think, to education, for instance. Can you take us through the journey, and perhaps what does it take to make governments successful in promoting human capital? What have you learned, and what would you share?
Thank you, Julie. I would like to perhaps highlight 4 key pillars to sustaining high human capital formation. The first is having a shared and sustained national vision. From way back at independence, Kenya focused on the alleviation of poverty, ignorance, and disease. Our Vision 2030 has 3 pillars, one of which is on human capital. And currently, we are implementing our 3rd development plan, and it focuses heavily on health and human development. So sustaining a national vision for human development. Second, putting your money where your mouth is. It's one thing to talk political rhetoric, it's another to back it up with resources. We spend about more than 6% of our GDP on education, about a quarter, 25% to 27% on education, and that is backed up by almost as much from the private sector. And we're following the same path on health, which is lagging slightly behind. 3, focusing on best buys, high impact, low cost interventions that then create their own dynamic. Family planning, primary education followed by secondary education, focusing on maternal and child health, relatively low investments but with high payoff impacts both currently and for future generations. And finally, a very strong leadership. We've been blessed in having leaders for the last 50 years who see particular education as the gateway to success, and that has created its own social momentum where it's almost unstoppable even from the population. Go to any political campaign, listen to any politician, call any meeting to build schools, support kids to go to school. So that kind of creating a social dynamic and political dynamic that supports education is in many ways what has gotten us here.
Wow, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that. In a short while, I am going to come to the floor for one question, maybe 2 if we have time, although we are already short on time, and we may take a question from the internet. I'll come back to you first, though, with a very quick one, if you could make this one as short as possible. So, Paula, I'll start with you. Let's just take a look at what the digital environment and what innovation means in terms of opportunity for Africa. Take us through how we can leverage this to really transform the continent.
So I like to start off with making a disclaimer that technology and innovation are not siloed efforts, but more enablers of what is already existing. And very specifically, if I quickly respond to the 2 aspects of education and healthcare. First, with healthcare, what has happened is that we started off with reforms. I did give you a history of what our country looked like. We started off with putting in place key traditional reforms that were very central to the discussion before we start to think about leveraging technology. And those included really affording universal healthcare insurance to the different segments of the population, and to an extent subsidizing that for some of the populations that could not afford. But then, of course, fast forward, we started to think, if technology is an enabler and a means to fast-track and leapfrog some of the socio-economic development agenda and programs that we have as a country, what do we do? I'll give a few examples just to highlight what has been done. Many people in this room are probably aware of the story of Zipline and Rwanda, where what we did was to provide a proof of concept environment for some of these emerging technologies, drone technologies, to come and pilot the use of drones in delivering blood products and other medical products to rural areas. But it's not just that we use drones, it was the impact that was created, where deaths were reduced and we're able to reduce blood wastage from 8% to 0.06%.
So it's intentional use
Very
of the
intentional,
tech
exactly.
to transform.
Exactly. Yes. And then a second element for healthcare is, just like the rest of the continent, mobile phone technology is one aspect that is driving technology diffusion and adoption. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to leverage that where we're using, with the support of Babil, that is using, that is providing primary healthcare consultations through a mobile phone, and this technology is paired with physical doctors and AI and machine learning, and it's just a phone call for you to get the primary diagnosis, and if you need to go for further intervention. So that's just on healthcare, because I know we're very mindful on time. When we talk about education, with education, what we've done is to say, there are two aspects, access and quality, and that also applies to healthcare. How do we leverage technology as a tool where we increase the access of education, but also the quality? Right. And here, I really want to thank the World Bank, because at the onset, as we started to rebuild and reconstruct ourselves as a country, the World Bank was an instrumental partner in laying out the foundational aspects of building connectivity across the entire country to afford every school and every healthcare institution the ability to be connected. And so very quickly, key things that are being done for education is that we are targeting the demand and supply side. On the demand side, we're looking at the population. How do you build a digitally literate population that is able to consume all these digital products and services that we provide? And this is where we've rolled out a digital ambassadors program, where we go out year-long and train the different citizens so that they're able to use the mobile phone and any other electronic devices to access government services that are now fully rolled online. The second aspect now goes on the supply side, where you create professionals, really building the critical mass and understanding the gaps, attracting world-class institutions like CMU, AIMS, and Mandela to help us to bridge and build the critical mass of talent that we really require so that we build a digitally literate population.
Thank you so much for that, for talking us through that and reminding us it's the intentionality that's absolutely critical for the impact. Let me come to you now, Dr. Pleasant. And, I've heard President Paul Kagame actually speaking and say, we're always talking about money, investment money, but sometimes it's not necessarily about the money. It's about what we do with what we have. So let me bring this to you. We talk about sometimes getting countries to invest in financing for human development outcomes is a challenge. But from your perspective, so is it a matter of money, or is it a matter of smarter actualization and smarter implementation? What do you think?
Four things. The first one is that most African economies, they have a small GDP. If I was an example of Malawi, our GDP is only about $6 billion. And when it comes to per capita public spending, because the GDP is small, you'll find that in the case of Malawi, per capita public spending overall is somewhere around $120 to $150 per capita public spending. And it will allocate from $150 to education, health, and other sectors. We end up with something like $30 per capita education spending. That's very, very low compared to developed economies. That's one of the challenges that many African economies face. We need to quickly raise productivity, increase economic growth so that GDP goes up, so that allocation, government is able to extract something out of that GDP so that it can allocate towards education and health. That's one of the challenges that most African economies are facing. The second challenge is that of proper resource mobilization. There are a lot of leakages of whatever government can collect. In some cases, tax evasion or poor administration of revenue collections. Again, you lose a lot in uncollected revenue. That's another area which governments have to put a lot of emphasis so that all the revenues that can be collected are collected and redirected towards education and health. The third area is just pure misallocation of resources. Instead of prioritizing education and health, especially for the girl child, sometimes those are not priorities in national budgets. And that's an area again to focus on, that more resources, bearing and considering the fact that girl child education is very, very critical, we must put our resources there. Currently, it's only 4% of the GDP based on the average for the continent. That's too small. We need to allocate more towards education and focusing on the girl child. And finally, it's also the issues, even after allocating the little resources towards this sector, in many cases, we don't get efficiencies in the way the resources are being applied and used. There are a lot of leakages in the way the resources are used. We need to ensure that there's efficiency. Every dollar allocated in education is properly utilized and is giving us the best best returns that we can get. Those are 4 key areas, in my view. So just about a question of pouring in resources, but it's about how well we have raised the resources, we have applied and used those resources, and we all need to be accountable. And the World Bank have the expertise to help many of our economies in how we can get that right so that we can invest in the girl child education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. And when we talk about leakages and inefficiencies, we are also talking about the corruption that's sometimes happening. We're saying if $1 is allocated, $1 must be spent on the right things. Let me come to you, Minister Kane, and to Ruth Kagia as we close. I really want you both to give us a rallying call. I will come to the floor and bring back the questions here, but you know, if you were to rally this group of people, and we have government, we have private sector, what would you say? What must we focus on? What must we leave this room thinking about and going to act on? Minister Kane, let me start with you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Well, the last speaker has just explained the situation. You have got to stress education of young girls, because that is the beginning, that is the entry point, the gateway to any changes, health, education, etc. All of our problems can be resolved if we manage to truly promote education of girls up to university level. That's important. So to do so, we will need to find financing. I come from a country that spends 22% of our budget on education, 22%. And we spend 11% on health. A country like Niger, with all of its issues, you'll see that nonetheless we are well behind in many ways, even if we are ahead. And yet what we have done on the right lines is still not enough, because even 22% of our being spent on education, we still don't manage to get all of our children in school, only half of our school. So what's going to happen to the out of 600,000 children who should be going to school, we only managed to get 300,000. What are they going to do in life? Are they going to join terrorist gangs? I don't know. We've got to come up with some sort of solution. So the rallying cry that I would give you is that we've got to be sure that our partners have got to understand that this issue of education is an urgent one. And that means that we have got to have a program of urgency, an urgent program, if we are to truly build a human capital in Africa, so that we can truly build up a generation of Africans who can take on the task. And to do that, we've got to have financing, not just of our states. We've got to have financing to be done by all of our partners, so that we have a strategy which will allow us to build what we want to build, and to do so in a coordinated way. We've got to come up with a synergy so that we will have greater impact, and that would be my appeal. Even if we were to spend 50% of our budget to do this, it still wouldn't be enough. Thank you very much.
This challenge maybe we have in that regard is there are a lot of hard issues that we need to deal with, but there's a lot of software, human issues that we need to tap into there to really ensure that these girls are able to stay in school, do get to university, and we get to transform their lives. Ruth Kagia, what's your call to action?
Thank you for that question, Julie. 3 points. The first is, why is it taking us so long to recognize that the people are the most important? As far back as when we were looking at the East Asia miracle growth, it was clear that a lot of the unexplained growth was because of human capital. The 1990 World Development Report on poverty focused on using fully the most abundant resource of poor people, which is their labor, making their labor more productive and providing social services. And all the evidence since has demonstrated the very high payoff to investing in people. To me, what puzzles me is why has it taken so long? And I want to thank the bank for finally putting this together and beginning on this human capital project. And I hope that this is really finally going to, in a sense, round off the development agenda, which cannot be rounded off if it's standing only on the economic leg. That's the first one. The second one is focus on the quick wins. Girls, the intersectoral elements, nutrition, because poorly mothers who are malnourished produce smaller babies who then create a vicious cycle of poverty and so on and so forth. Educating girls, starting with one right here. If you educate a girl, they change the world, as we have all discovered and as we have all confirmed. Focusing particularly on adolescent girls, because that is the intersection where you either make them or lose them. Focusing on stunting, as came up and as the King so articulately expressed. And finally, and perhaps addressing this to the World Bank, working a little bit more programmatically. When you do an education project, it may have a nutrition component, but the two don't talk. When you talk, you do a social protection project, focusing on perhaps the most vulnerable in, just doing cash transfers to a household does not necessarily mean the resources are going to go to the most vulnerable. When we had a drought 2 years ago, it is the able-bodied young men who would go to collect the money for cash transfer, and by the time they got home, most of it was spent. So thinking a little bit more in terms of the impact, particularly to the most vulnerable, and maybe revisiting your programs and our programs as governments to see how the intersections can make the sum more than the parts. But for me, the bottom line, Julie, is this is an idea whose time has long come. Let's just get on with it.
Thank you.
And do what makes most sense.
Thank you so much. Just do it. It's time. Just do it. I'm going to be able to take only one question, and I believe it's from Japan. The request came in. I'm so sorry, my dear. I see your hand. Where do we have the speaker from Japan who wanted to make an intervention? Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
I hope. Oh, okay. Microphone is on. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the panelists for a very lively and thought-provoking discussion. It's very helpful. And well, Japan has been promoting promoting universal health coverage for our developing partners for many years now, and also we are among the perhaps the strongest supporter of the human capital investment initiative of the World Bank, which should make a huge difference in the epoch making, I think, and. Please allow me to speak a little bit about the G20 this year under the Japanese presidency, and
I'll ask you very briefly though, because our time is very tight. Yes.
So then I skip everything prepared, and
thank you, sir.
But I'd like to thank you, some panelists, in bringing the issue of the financing of healthcare, and that's exactly what the G20 has been discussing for the first time in the G20 history, I think. I'm sure, and then my interest is in what elements or the factors we should have in mind when we focus the UHC financing discussion on helping the women and children and the vulnerables, and in the African context, and then the answer should inform Japan as well when we host the big African Assistance Conference this August. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make an executive decision just to take one more question. The lady who had put her hand up first. Are you ready? Yes, thank you so much. So we'll take that one, and then I'll bring them. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency, thank you so much. I want to thank the Excellency for the agriculture nutrition. My company is called Segueros International Group. We focus more on agriculture. As we have spoken here, His Excellency, you are at the African Union. Africa needs to focus more on agriculture and farmers, because those children we are talking about, when they are hungry, they don't learn and they don't go to school. I have a school in my own country, Kenya. I come from Kenya. So World Bank, His Excellency, at the African, let's focus on agriculture, put more money in food, security, nutrition for the children.
Thank you.
So that's the main thing I can say. And thank you so much for the young people. My own son is deaf. So I really appreciate the deaf block, and I'll include.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think a very important reminder of the importance of agriculture in all this. We haven't touched on that a lot, but I think we all know this is a central focus for the continent and for unlocking opportunity. Very quickly, who would like to touch on the issue that has been raised on universal health coverage and what we must now focus on? What would you say to Japan? What should we be financing? What is absolutely critical when it comes to UHC? And I think, Paula, I'll bring that to you first.
So I think earlier I did share very briefly what Rwanda had done in terms of affording universal healthcare coverage to its people. And I think it's a model that can be replicated anywhere in the world. The question is really understanding the different segments of the society, understanding what the ability to pay for these services looks like, and even really putting in place mechanisms. So today our society has been segmented into 4 different categories according to the income levels. And the very last income, the ones who can't really afford even, basic services, the government subsidizes that for them. And that is really subsidized through, financing from partners. So I think it really starts from really understanding what are the segments of your economy, the population, what is their willingness to pay and their ability to pay, and what subsidies need to be put in place. Because my school of thought is you will not just hand over free healthcare. You need to find ways of subsidizing by encouraging people to take full responsibility of the basic services.
Thank you. Would anybody like to add to that? Yes, please, Minister Khan. Very briefly, please, Minister.
Oui, très brièvement. En fait, je voudrais répondre.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to the question raised by the gentleman from Japan, and also to the question raised by the lady who spoke of agriculture. The fact is that distribution of human capital is particularly urgent in the rural sector. 80% of our active population is in the rural area. The poor live in the rural area. The young and the women whom we are talking about are particularly prevalent in the rural areas, and they're underemployed if they're employed at all, and they have no education. So we've got to coalesce. We've got to synergize, if you will, in order to do this. And to do so, we have to put the emphasis on the rural area.
Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your contributions. And you may take your seats. Thank you very, very much. Just on the UHC question, I think there's a lot of talking happening between different stakeholders. I guide a lot of those discussions. And I think working on bringing private sector, the development world, financing partners and government together to be more aligned in purpose is a very important thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we move on now. And we turn to a movement of youth that's doing incredible work driving change around the world. Now, last year, I had the pleasure of being in Johannesburg for the Global Citizen Concert. Mandela 100 Festival is what it was called. And I can tell you it was energizing, it was electrifying, it was purposeful. They're doing absolutely incredible work. Let's take a look at a short video now of one of their campaigns by local artists and the impact it's having. Let's have a look.
Dear President Ramaphosa, it's bloody time. We need to invest in young women's futures. and opportunities. We need to invest in menstrual health. Right now in South Africa, we have young women missing out on school, which happens every month, and that is a lot of school time that they're missing out on. I have personally never been affected by the inability to take care of myself during my own period, but I can only imagine what young women in the townships and the rural areas are going through, not being able to get sanitary towels to take care of themselves, not being able to go outside, and especially at a young age, not being able to play with one's friends, nor go to school. This is why I and thousands of others took action. Last year, global citizens took 136,000 actions, calling on the South African government to end the tax on menstrual health products like pads and tampons, invest 1.7 billion rand to ensure all girls in grades 4 through 12 in public schools get access to free sanitary pads for 2 years. And lastly, girls and boys receive quality menstrual health education in school. The good news is the South African government heard our calls. Last October, South African Finance Minister Mboweni eliminated taxes on menstrual health products and has promised to ensure that girls will have access to sanitary pads in school. In November, Minister of Energy Jeff Radebe promised to personally discuss with you why countless South African global citizens were taking action on this issue. In December, President Ramaphosa, you committed to 2 billion rand and spoke about the importance of menstrual health.
Now we as South Africa will top it up and we will make it a wholesome 100 billion. We have also heard the cry and the call of the girl child who is deprived of education because she cannot afford sanitary products. As a government, we are responding to that call.
But the South African government has not made clear to global citizens whether the 2 billion rand will be used for free sanitary pads and menstrual health education for girls and children in need. That's why we urgently need to use our collective voice and make sure the South African government steps up. President Ramaphosa, it's bloody time. We need to invest in menstrual health. Sincerely, Balis.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to Global Citizen. Thank you.
Hi, well, I realize we're running slightly over, so we beg your indulgence for just 10 more minutes. The context behind the campaign you just saw is that when Global Citizen was invited to South Africa last year to produce what ended up being one of our largest events ever with some of the world's greatest artists from Beyonce to Jay-Z, across with some of the continent's phenomenal artists from D'banj to Wizkid to Femi Kuti. You know, when we launched that campaign in honor of one of arguably the greatest global citizens of our time, Nelson Mandela, for this huge festival in December, there was 3 hashtags that was trending. There was Beyonce, naturally, there was Mandela 100, and finally, there was It's Bloody Time. And so in the spirit of being a platform to amplify local NGOs, activists, this became one of the defining features of that entire festival, as we were tweeted at and asked to be reactive to that and say, promote this issue, because menstrual health and how it links to girls' education and human capital is one that needs to be promoted. And in total, as part of that campaign, over 2.2 million actions were taken by global citizens across Southern Africa. 270,000 people signed up. What were these actions that people were taking in order to earn tickets? They were tweets, they were emails, they were phone calls, they were signing petitions to leaders demanding that they invest in people, that they invest in health, in education, in nutrition. And they weren't just online actions. We had collectively almost 200,000 offline actions. We had over 200 cleanup days, over 900 HIV testing, all in response. And collectively, this resulted in some 7.1 billion worth of commitments. And we've heard some phenomenal speeches today. This wasn't just commitments from large institutions like the World Bank, although we are grateful that as they rocked up, former President Jim Kim got on stage and announced $1 billion, which I think today became $15 billion. So thank you, World Bank. It wasn't just from other companies, but it was also from governments themselves. His Majesty, Your Majesty, we were honored that your government pledged around nutrition to provide school meals for all kids, working with the World Food Programme. Thank you for your leadership. Rwanda, we had the president of your country, then chair of the African Union, get up and stand up. And we had Kenya, and I think we've heard the message today to get on and do it. And Kenya pledged that they would provide almost 30% of their entire budget towards education. This was phenomenal. We had others. We had Sierra Leone. And so I want to ask you to applaud these, because we need government standing up. And for us as civil society, we will always applaud those that stand up and put their citizens first. But of course, there's still more work to do. We believe we've got a commitment now to monitor these commitments, follow up. We've had over 30,000 global citizens sign up since December across the SADC region. We're committed to providing that platform, working with artists. And so I think it's fitting that the last speaker of today goes to the inaugural recipient of our Global Citizen Youth Prize, which was sponsored by Cisco, showcasing their commitment to scale up capital into the region, investing into the opportunity that's this amazing continent. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome and congratulations to Awera. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Let me tell you my story. I was born into a typical Kenyan middle-class home where my parents took me to schools they could barely afford to give me a future they couldn't have imagined for myself. That's me when I was a little chubby, young. I think I was 1 or 2 there. And that's me graduating from the University of South Australia. Now, today, hundreds of millions of Africans, children, are going to school hungry. And 1 in 4 children of the population in Kenya is in primary school, yet 1 in 4 of children are stunted. Now, I'm a nutritionist, and that I've been trained to let it bother me. I started Food for Education because hundreds of millions of children going to school hungry is unacceptable. What we do is that we use smart logistics, we use technology to deliver heavily subsidized meals to school children. We've delivered 500,000 meals so far, where parents contribute for the cost of a meal through mobile money, which is loaded up to an NFC smartwatch, like, can everyone see this? Like this one I'm wearing. So each child has a device like this, where each parent puts up money through mobile money. M-Pesa, anyone? M-Pesa? Yes, we all know M-Pesa. And then this goes directly to a child's wallet. And what they have to do is tap to eat in under 5 seconds. So we're using technology, we're using supply chain and logistics to bring nutritious food to children across Kenya and scaling towards across Africa. Because as we've heard, nutrition is a big crisis around the continent. Now, this is our devices that we use, like I've shown you. In 2050, the UN estimates that 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. That's 25% of the population of the world. In 1991, when I was born, 1 billion people in the world were undernourished. In 2017, 821 million people were undernourished. That's just an 18% decrease in 26 years. I believe we can do better than that. Do you guys believe we can do better than that? Yes, we can. And that's why we're here, right? So when we talk about feeding Africa, feeding African children, we're talking about feeding the future of Africa and also the future of the world. I believe in Africa. I'm an African. And the reason we're all here is because we believe in this continent and we believe that Africa is the future. Thank you.
You know, I feel like a proud mama when I see young Africans bringing the solutions and transforming our continent. And it's an amazing thing. Thank you, Awera, for the work that you do. Now, to finish off, we have a special video message from a young lady who lives in Ghana. She's 11-year-old Eric Tando, and she's better known as DJ Switch. Let's see what she has to say to us.
Switch. Hey, I'm a can who see a wedding party.
You brought your own special guest.
Hello, my name is Erica, but people know me as DJ Switch from Ghana. I want to tell our leaders to invest in the children of Africa, to invest in quality education, good health and well-being, and to invest in gender equality. Our leaders should help stop early marriages because girls are not brides. Although being a DJ is my passion, I want to be a gynecologist when I grow up. I want to be a doctor DJ because I was told when my mom was giving birth to me, she suffered a lot, so I want to make delivery easy while I play good music. I hope you are all listening because we need everyone's help to make our dreams become a reality, because we will become your future leaders. So I encourage everyone to invest in us, to invest in me. Switch up.
Wow. And we have heard, yes? Have we heard the message? To finish off, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share some words of African wisdom. Do not stand in a place of danger trusting miracles. We must not. We must be intentional in our thoughts, our plans, and our actions. Investing in people is critical. Some more words of African wisdom. The ant on its feet can do more than the elephant lying down. We all have a role to play, and we must all do what we can where we are. Finally, the teeth that are together help in chewing the food, right? We have to work together. And with those words, I finish by saying, let's invest in people, and Africa can. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day. Asante.